All right, well, it's now a couple minutes past 11, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we hand the reins over to Dustin, I'm going to do some housekeeping thing. First of all, my name is Caitlin. I'm part of the marketing team here at Gatsby, and if you need captions, we do have live streaming captions available, and you can see the link in the chat. It should have also been in one of your login emails. Additionally, we're going to be doing questions a little differently. We're using an application called Slido, and you can access Slido by going to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and then you enter the code 5683, and I will pop that info into the chat real quick. And number 5683. And so, yeah, we're going to start with about 20 to 30 minutes of news and demoing Cloud, and then we'll be open to questions. So please do ask your questions. In Slido, you can upvote questions if there's one that you really would like us to address. And yeah, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dustin, who is our product manager for Cloud. So take it away, Dustin.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. Just need to make sure I can share my screen.
Hang on just a second, Dustin. I can't see you in the list for some reason. So sorry about the technical difficulties. I will mess around with this a little bit.
No worries. While we're figuring this out, I'll go ahead and just get started with my intro, kind of the agenda of what I'm hoping to achieve today. So on the next slide, I'll do an intro of myself. But until then, what I'll be doing today is I'll be going through a demo of what Gatsby Cloud is and the value that you, a user of Gatsby, can get with Gatsby Cloud. So I'll go into the ins and outs of what our Gatsby Cloud Suite offerings are. So it'll be a discussion of preview and builds, and then I will go into kind of like the 60 to 90-day roadmap for not only the cloud product, but also the open source product. So it'll kind of give you an indication of what we're kind of slotting for Q1 of next year. And, oh, go ahead, Caitlin.
Sorry, Dustin. I was just going to say you should have control. You just need to open up the sharing tab at the top of the control panel and hit play.
I have it. Awesome. And then thank you. Sure. And then we'll finish up with some brief demos of Gatsby Cloud. So with all that said, I hope you're as excited as I am, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as Caitlin said, my name is Dustin Schau. Any regular attendees to these webinars have probably seen or heard my name before. You might notice a slight role shift. So am and always was a software engineer, started on the open source team. I recently-ish moved to Mountain View, California, so that's been a fun little change. And a fun fact about me that's not really about me is I am engaged to a triplet. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So very first question, hopefully you already have the answer to this, but I think it's important to just be explicitly on the same page. So, what is Gatsby? So as I see Gatsby, I think of Gatsby as a platform, as a framework in which we're building tools to help you build the modern web. So you might have heard terms like content mesh, static site generator, app compiler. These are all true, and I think these are all hallmarks and exemplars of where we're going with the modern web, which I oftentimes also liken to the content web. So next question, what is Gatsby Cloud? So I think of Gatsby Cloud really as the best way to create and deploy Gatsby websites. And actually in my demo, I'll show how to create and I'll show two separate flows. One is if I don't have a Gatsby application, and then one is if I already have an existing application. And I'll show actually deploying of the existing Gatsby application to Netlify. So really common question is, what offerings are actually available in Gatsby Cloud? What value am I getting, as a Gatsby user or as someone who's interested in using Gatsby out of Gatsby Cloud? So the first offering is Gatsby Preview. So I think of Preview as like a private playground for developers, designers, and content creators. So what Preview's purpose really is, what it's kind of tailor-made for, is we've seen the unbundling of the CMS. So you might have heard of tools like Contentful. Of course, you've heard of tools like WordPress, Drupal, etc. And these CMSs are oftentimes going headless. And when you go headless, you sort of leave your content creators, your designers and people who are editing content a little bit stranded. And so what Gatsby Preview does is it allows you to continue using the tools that you know and love, Contentful, WordPress, etc. And it lets your content creators be empowered to know what the changes will look like in context with a live preview window of the application. And so this is like a really, really great use case. And we've heard a lot of great feedback about how much our users love the Gatsby Preview product. So I think it's really helpful to kind of take a step back and kind of describe things by analogy. So if we think of a house, and if we think of Gatsby Cloud as the foreman, or as the construction company that specializes in building a certain kind of house, the house that Gatsby Preview constructs is sort of like the shell of a house. So it looks like your house, it feels like your house, but when you actually get into it, it's not actually what you'd want to share with everyone. And so the why of this is that Gatsby Preview is running your application in develop mode. So it's not a production ready version of your site. And so why we do this is so that we can, swap out content, we can change the color of the house, you can, change the windows locations, et cetera, really, really easily, really, really cheaply. And so this is really the kind of analogy that I think of, the mental model I hold for what Gatsby Preview is. And so we'll come back to this house analogy in a little bit when we talk about Gatsby builds. So I think I think an example is helpful here of what Gatsby Preview can do. So on the left, we have Contentful. And so you see, your content editor is using Contentful, changing the title, and you can see on the right, the Gatsby Preview window, which is updating. So you saw the title change to the future is faster than ever before. And then now you see the subtitle change. And so the idea here again is that we're really empowering content editors to keep using the tools that they know and love, the tools that make them productive, the tools that make them feel at home, but also have a really excellent website produced as a result, and an excellent preview capability so that you can kind of get that like live preview like functionality that your content creators still want and need to be effective and empowered in their jobs. So when I talk through what Gatsby Cloud is, it's a suite of offerings that make building and creating Gatsby applications super easy. And so the other offering is Gatsby Builds, which is currently in private beta. And so the idea here is that because we know better than anyone else, what makes a Gatsby application tick, the intricacies, the ins and outs of what makes Gatsby Gatsby, Builds can then provide all the automation and infrastructure you need for instant continuous deployment. And so again, I think it's helpful to give an analogy. So other continuous deployment solutions, they generalize in all kinds of houses, small houses, big houses, brick houses, Victorian houses. Gatsby Builds specializes in a certain kind of house, an excellent, beautiful looking house like this, super performant. And what Gatsby Builds does is it's able to build out this house. We're the construction company, we're the foreman, quicker and more reliably than anyone else. And the key thing here is that subsequent rebuilds are going to be faster than others because we're basically keeping the materials around, between builds. And so if we think of an example, without Gatsby Builds, what happens if you'd like to change the color of your door in your house? And the reality of it is that you construct your house anew, even if you're only changing one thing. So, you're like, oh, I really I love my home, but I wish my door was red. Without Gatsby Builds, you'll basically, from entirely new materials, entirely new wood, entirely new windows, everything, you'll construct an entirely new copy of your house and then kind of lay it on top of where your house needs to be placed on your land. So with Gatsby Builds, we swap the door. So incremental builds is the idea I'm kind of getting at here. So with incremental builds, when you want to change the color of the door from blue to red, we'll keep your house around. We won't reconstruct your house between builds. And then we'll do the minimum amount of work to just swap the door, not entirely reconstruct the house. And so the ultimate goal is to make Gatsby builds ever faster, ever quicker, ever more reliable, eventually culminating, but continually improving with incremental builds. And so I think our goal here with Gatsby builds is that really the ultimate goal is for the concept of a build to be like an afterthought, a commodity, something that you really don't even think about. And so anyone who's used, Gatsby or other static site generators, app compilers, oftentimes you're sort of build time constrained. You need to be comfortable with the eventual consistency that when I change a piece of content, my build will eventually go live. The idea with Gatsby builds is that we're reducing the time to eventuality, eventually culminating in, ideally sub-second builds. And so the idea here is that your content creators, can again keep using the tools that they know and love, and then we'll specialize because we understand Gatsby applications, do the smallest amount of work to get your house built out, and so that you don't even have to really think about what a build is. You trust the construction company, you trust the foreman to get things done, and that's the model I hold for Gatsby builds. So a really cool idea here, and I think a really common question that we've had before is Gatsby builds doing hosting, or how do I host my Gatsby built application? And so again, if we think of what Gatsby builds is, it's the continuous deployment solution. So it specializes in building Gatsby applications. The really cool idea here is that we can also deploy anywhere. So based on this model of hooks, so when data changes in a CMS, when your developers or designers make a change to your Git repo, this will then trigger the Gatsby build service, and then the Gatsby build service will build your application. It'll construct your home quicker than anyone else can, and then it can then deploy your application to any number of providers. So currently we have around 6. So what's really cool is you can use Netlify, you can use S3 and CloudFront, Fastly, Firebase has hosting, and several more. And so the idea here is that Gatsby builds will be the continuous deployment piece, and then it can deploy your application to whichever hosting provider that you like, whichever CDN that you're a big proponent of. The other really cool thing, and a complaint or a request that we've heard from a lot of users, is that they'd really, really love to be able to see Lighthouse reports on every kind of build. So on like a pull request, if you add 6 libraries and you really bloat your JavaScript bundle, it'd be nice to catch that at pull request time rather than retroactively, following up 2 weeks later. And so Gatsby Builds has automatic Lighthouse reports that are run on every single commit. And so the idea here is that you can be fast with Gatsby, and you can also stay fast with Gatsby by using Gatsby Cloud and this notion of Lighthouse reports. And so what a Lighthouse report actually looks like, and I'll actually demo this in a bit. It looks something like this. So this is a build card. Our build completed in 1 minute 9 seconds. Not even as fast as we'd like, but still pretty blazing fast. And you can see the Lighthouse scores here. So performance 98, accessibility 95, best practices 93. I need to bump those numbers up. I need to be hundreds across the board. But again, with Gatsby, you get this like really solid baseline. And then with these scores, then I now have tangible ways to know that I can improve at PR time, not following up retroactively. So one of the most common questions we get is like, what's the roadmap? What's coming next? When can I expect these things to be publicly available? And importantly, what's the open source roadmap? Like, what's going on in open source? Because we want to hear about both. We want to hear about Gatsby, the open source product, and then Gatsby Cloud, both of which are appealing to every user of Gatsby. So the idea here is that we'll release builds and continually improve build times. So builds today is a competitive product. It's in private beta, so if you'd like to test it out, we can certainly send some links after here, gatsbyjs.com/builds beta. And the idea here is that we're already fast, and our commitment is that we'll continually keep improving, continually keep getting faster, eventually incremental, but incremental isn't even the final solution. It's constant improvement, it's constant tweaks, it's constant improvements to reliability that only we can make because we understand Gatsby applications the best, and we specialize in, as you may expect, Gatsby applications. We'll be putting our data up front and center. So oftentimes you might hear requests or complaints that performance of the Gatsby built application, of Gatsby powered applications as far as the build time can be a little slower than people would like. And so we'll be launching a service that will show Gatsby built applications of various sizes and various complexity, and the actual amount of time that they can be built in with a publicly available application. And so this will help you make an informed decision as to whether your application, whether your content complexity, the number of pages that you have in your CMS can be built reliably and quickly with Gatsby Cloud. And this is kind of like the rallying call of what we'll be working on in Q1. So we're really doubling down on what's working. We're improving what's not, and we're blazing new trails in open source. And so I'd like to talk through some tangible examples of what I mean by these. So when I say we're doubling down on what we think is working, it's really we're doubling down on what our users love and what we think that you love about Gatsby open source. And I think of this as like pillars, or as it's kind of like a framework to understand what makes Gatsby open source so appealing. And for me, and I think for our users, there's really two pillars. There's performance, by statically generating your application up front and generating as much of your application statically as possible. Your application, is incredibly fast. Your users love it. All of your metrics go up, and this is really what got me into Gatsby. And so we want to continually and ever improve performance. Also, it's a great developer experience that Gatsby has. Tools like GraphQL, a really nice mental model of using React components, statically generating, nice feedback in the CLI, etc. These are the two pillar stones that we want to continually and ever make improvements, because they are what probably drew you to Gatsby, and they're really what makes Gatsby so special and such an appealing product. So at the same time, what are areas we can improve? And I think how we do this is we address the areas that you maybe don't love about Gatsby open source. And to be honest, it's kind of the same two things. Our greatest strengths are also perhaps the most critiqued and the most that people really find some issues with. And so we want to fix all of these issues. We want to make performance best in class. So we're planning on doing like performance budgets. So at build time, you can get a nice little report. If your application is doing some things more slowly or loading too much JavaScript. Again, developer experience. We've heard from users that error messages and our CLI can be improved. So we're going to really make some broad sweeping improvements to both of these two camps, performance and developer experience. So we want to double down on what's working, and we also want to be aware and cognizant that there are some areas of frustration here that we can really improve. And we're really looking forward to making some improvements here. From this lens, Gatsby now has a dedicated performance engineer specializing in the build time performance. So we want to make Gatsby ever more scalable, not only from an open source perspective, but of course from a cloud perspective as well. And so this is a really exciting time to make Gatsby, an appealing choice for a 100,000 page site, a 500,000 page site, eventually a 1 million page site, and onwards. And so to this end, please send us your large sites. We have an open GitHub issue that's pinned on our Gatsby Deos open source repo. If you're able to share, even via Twitter, DM, or email, we'll profile, benchmark, and we'll use these to drive improvements for not only your site that you can get just by upgrading your version of Gatsby, but everyone, the entire ecosystem. So I think it's a really exciting time to be using Gatsby, because we can make some broad sweeping improvements that benefit the entire ecosystem. And so I think where we're at currently with Gatsby from a developer experience tool is that we tend to focus on the sharp knife, the lower level APIs that really enable you to do kind of whatever you'd like to do. I think we're moving towards, and I think it's a better developer experience if we also offer kind of abstractions on top of these lower level APIs that enable you to build and use simple declarative tools. And so as an example, the sharp knife solution, getting into the nitty gritty, is things like GraphQL, the create page action, so a way that you can manually create pages, and then of course, to abstract them both, APIs. And so what we're moving towards is themes. So we want to double down on themes, ensure that themes are as easy as easy to author as possible, including like a great data layer. We'd like to abstract the create page action and do things like template routes so that you can use file system based routing for kind of like wildcards. So imagine a blog post that you can do like year, date, month, like slugified by the file system. And again, it's just abstractions. It's building upon this great base, this really developer-friendly tool, and making it more and more approachable, effectively all the time. So the key takeaway here is that it's really core and cloud. We're continually driving improvements in both that make Gatsby better, faster, and easier to use for teams. And I personally think it's a really exciting time to be in the Gatsby ecosystem. So I think talk is cheap. I think what people are really interested in is some demos. So what I'd like to show right now is Gatsby Cloud, and I'll show two different kind of like workflows. So I think they're pretty exciting. So the first one, I'm going to presume that I don't already have a Gatsby site. And so this flow, I don't already have a Gatsby site, will create the GitHub repo. It will connect to CMS, and then it'll automatically provision all of those for me. So we have a couple of examples to begin with, and we'll be adding more and more all the time. And so what I'd like to do is, hey, I'm a developer. I should have a blog. And so I'd like to have a blog with Cosmic.js. So we'll call our blog Gatsby blog Cosmic 2019-12-12. This will then create the GitHub repo. All right, and then we can connect our CMS provider. So we've chosen Cosmic here. I'll add my auth token. This will then create the Cosmic.js bucket so that I can go in and edit content, Gatsby blog Cosmic 2019. And then I can go ahead and start my site. And so what this is going to do is this is going to create my Gatsby Cloud application, my Gatsby Cloud site. And it also has a nice handy manage your content in Cosmic here. So let's go ahead and finish, and I'll show the repository as well. All right, so what's happened right now is that we've created a preview so that you as the owner of this blog can go in and change content in Cosmic.js, and then you can see it appear. So while this is building, I'm going to go ahead and show a separate workflow. So there are two common paths here. There's I don't have a Gatsby site, so create everything for me, and then I do already have a Gatsby site. So in this instance, let's say I'm a Gatsby developer. I have a Gatsby site, and I really want to deploy my application quicker than anyone else because I've been running into some timeouts, I've been running into some issues with the reliability, and I really just want a reliable, robust, quick solution so that I can reliably build my Gatsby application. So I have a super work in progress website I've been working on. So it's my wedding website, and so this website is powered by Contentful. So I'll go in and connect with Contentful. What this will do is this will create a sidebar extension. This will also enable the webhooks so that preview works and also the build works on a publish, and I can show both of these in 1 second. So this will add all the necessary environment variables to my application. You can see here that the build webhook has been installed, environment variables, and then the preview extension. And then we can set up our site. So right now, this is just showing preview. What I really want to show is builds and then the Lighthouse reports. So this, like I said, is currently in private beta. If you'd like to sign up, you can go to Gatsby builds beta and then enter some info here, and then you'll be prioritized in the next couple weeks. And so right now, this is building out my preview application. Remember, this is the shell of my house. This is the shell that can be like quickly edited and changed. It's also building out my first build. This is my production deploy. So first, let's go. We can now see that the Gatsby blog Cosmic.js is now up. So let's show what preview looks like with Cosmic.js. So we'll go in, we'll edit this World Cup coming page. So we'll remove the smiley face, don't know why that's in there. And we'll say, hello, Town Hall Webinar. We'll save this draft because we want to see what it looks like in context, and then we can see it update. So of course, we change this again, hello, ×2. We'll save the draft, and then you can see it appear. Of course, you can then publish knowing with like full context what this publish is going to look like in my deployed application. So now let's show the separate flow. Looks like this is just about ready. Spent about 2 minutes, so most of it installing dependencies. While we're waiting for this, I can go ahead and pull up my contentful instance. And I can actually, so while I'm doing that as well, so I'll pull up the contentful space and I'll connect to Netlify. And so like I said, the idea here is that with Gatsby Cloud, we're the continuous deployment solution that will construct your house quicker than anyone else. And then we can then deploy it to wherever you'd like your house to live. So here, I'm going to select a Netlify site that I already have created, but of course you can also use one, we can also create one for you. And so what this means is that when we build out this application, we'll also deploy it to the hosting integration of your choice. So this one is currently updating and deploying, but I believe we can now show the preview. Okay, let's pull up this little trick again. So here, let's pull this up over and then this like this. And so this is this wedding blog. Go in here, because Gatsby is an application, like I've said many times, you can do whatever you'd want React to here. So I believe I will be attending my own. So let's go ahead and update that. And then, you can click through here. This wedding party is not done. Still need to work through it. Here is my brother. So we'll say, Austin's a pretty cool guy sometimes. And then you can see this Gatsby preview extension. And then you can see over here, it's been updated. So we edit this. You see the little exclamation point come in just 1 second. We publish our changes, and this will do a few things. So what's happened is that you can now see the Lighthouse reports. So our first run, this was built off of master, performance 99, accessibility 95, best practices 93. So we can actually dive in here further, and we can see that there are tangible ways that we can improve. We can pre-connect to required origins. I should probably do that. We can properly size images. So again, with this Lighthouse report, you keep performance a first-class concern, like you should with Gatsby. And then what's really quite cool is that we do provide a temporary hosting. So you can view this, and this is like a temporary application kind of per deploy. And then, you go in here, oh, we can turn the lights off, how cool. But what's especially great is that while this is building, this should be just about done, this also deployed to Netlify. And so if we go in here to the wedding party, you can see that my content change that was published is already live. And so this has been built, in, if we go through 39 seconds, so much more quickly than other continuous deployment solutions. And this is a production application that I can and should, serve traffic to on the edge. Activated dark mode, how classy. And yeah, hopefully you kind of get the idea of the picture we're painting with Gatsby Cloud. We're really proud of what we have, but we also are really proud of where we're going. And I can't wait for everyone to check it out and keep using it. So with that said, I think now is the time for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
All right, and I will take control of that screen. All right, here, just gotta give me just a second. Okay, so it looks like I might not be able to share my screen right now, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read the questions out. Because my computer wants me to restart GoToWebinar, and that seems like a bad idea. So again, if you have a question that you would like to submit, you can go to slido.com, that's SLIDO.com, and you input the code 5683, and then, we can see it there. So our first question here is, how does Lighthouse scoring work? Does it evaluate each page and then give you an average?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, Raphael. So how it works is Lighthouse tests are sort of notoriously CPU dependent. And so what the Lighthouse team actually recommends is you run 7 runs and then you take like the median score, mostly on performance, which tends to vary the most. And so we actually only do the homepage, but we've actually heard this feature request before. So this is a nice little data point to help prioritize that it could be quite cool if we could run several Lighthouse reports on several different pages. And so you probably want the home screen, but you might also want, screens X, Y, and Z, which tend to get a lot of traffic as well. So it's a great feature request. Yeah, just so currently it's just the home screen, which again is still quite great.
All right, so our next question is Gatsby Cloud envisioned as a competitor to a service like AWS Amplify?
It's a great question. So I think of them in some sense, yes, but I think of Gatsby Cloud as specializing in Gatsby applications, where something like Amplify is sort of like a general purpose tool. And so in some sense, yes, but I think that oftentimes when you specialize in something, you can get like a better, more optimized result, and that's what we're trying to do with our build service. So, like I mentioned, we'll make builds ever faster, ever improving, ever more reliable, and because we can specialize in Gatsby applications, that lets us do some things that other similar continuous deployment strategies can't do quite as well or quite as quickly.
Okay, great. So our next question is, will incremental builds be available in Gatsby Core for local development?
Incremental builds will not be available in Gatsby open source. The why of that is that the work that's required for incremental builds requires like spinning up services, it requires cloud functions, it requires making Gatsby like a long-running process. And so the quickest way to enable this and deliver the experience that our users need is to do so with cloud tooling, which is what Gatsby Cloud is doing. But we haven't necessarily ruled out in the future that it could be enabled in open source as well. But certainly cloud only, at least to begin with.
Okay. So our next question is there an example of using Gatsby Preview behind off?
There is. That's a great question. So there's, I believe, 2 auth strategies that we enable. So it's just a toggle in your Gatsby Preview site settings. So you can add just password protection, which you could then share with your team. Otherwise, we can put the same Gatsby Cloud authentication to log in. And so what you could then do is restrict it to just users of your Gatsby Gatsby Cloud suite. So Gatsby Cloud has a organization model wherein you can invite people to your Gatsby Cloud organization, and then in doing so, they'll get an invite, they'll need to log in, create an account, and you can restrict it to just the users in your account as well. So that works, and that's available today. But really great question.
Great. All right, we have a couple of questions in GoToWebinar, and I want to make sure we don't forget them, so I'm going to ask those. So our first one is, are there any plans for integration through any popular CI or CD in the future, like GCP, AWS, Azure, ?
Yeah, I think you mean so CI/CD with GCP and, sorry, Caitlin, what were the last couple?
GCP, AWS, and Azure.
Yeah, so I don't typically associate those as CI/CD platforms. I know GCP has like cloud build, and I know AWS is something similar. What we're thinking with Gatsby Cloud initially is that we're focusing on more of the continuous deployment strategy, which is Gatsby builds. But if you think of the Lighthouse report kind of as like one check that could be done in a CI suite, we will have more reports in the future. that can do similar types of CI functionality. So you might imagine maybe running end-to-end tests or running unit tests or running a linter, and those could certainly be reports that we enable in the future. As far as those platforms in particular, we do deploy it to AWS and S3 as a deployment target, as well as Google Cloud as a deployment target for the built application. So Gatsby Build will produce static content that we can then deploy to a deploy target like those several you mentioned.
Okay. Our next question, going back to Slido, is are there other tools Gatsby can use / integrate to measure performance?
So I'm going to answer this question from several perspectives. So Gatsby, the open source tool, by virtue of just being static content, it can be tested like really easily. And so a tool that I really like is Web Page Test, of course. I also really like Lighthouse, but Web Page Test I find tends to be really, really nice because you can test on like an actual network constrained, slow Android phone, which is a really great test of like how your users actually could be using your site, which is oftentimes understated. And so Gatsby open source, that's a tool I really like to use. Gatsby Cloud, like I said, we'd like to eventually offer more and more reports, and one that's like near and dear to my heart is certainly Web Page Test. I would really like to see that in the future. And then, if there's any other performance monitoring tools, we'd certainly like to hear about them. But those are the two that I typically use most frequently.
Okay. Next question, is Gatsby Builds a subproduct of Gatsby Cloud, or are they the same thing? If not, what's the difference?
So Gatsby Cloud is a suite of offerings. So Gatsby Preview is that live preview-like functionality that I showed. So edit in the CMS in like draft stage, and then Gatsby Preview will be updated. Think of it like a hot swappable, like hot reloading development environment, but running in the cloud, and then you can then share that URL with your team. Gatsby Builds is one product offering in the suite of Gatsby Cloud, and Gatsby Builds is currently in private beta. So if you subscribe and start using Gatsby Cloud, you'll currently have Gatsby Preview, and then in the future you'll have Gatsby Builds with reports, with more and more coming every day, faster and faster builds, eventually incremental builds.
Okay. I'm going to grab another one from GoToWebinar. This one is, how does Gatsby Cloud work with PR and contributions? Does Gatsby allow styling with React Bootstrap? So it seems like two questions there.
Yeah, so first question is Gatsby Cloud works with like PRs and like GitHub. So when you add the Gatsby or the Gatsby application, which in the flow that is most clear for this one, when I added my existing maggieanddustin.com website, that was a GitHub repo. And what that did is that gave me access to GitHub webhooks. And so whenever a content change is triggered on GitHub on the branch, for instance, if you're on your preview branch is configurable, but typically master, that will then mean that if we make a PR to master and like a change to master that gets merged, Gatsby Preview will hot reload with those changes. Second question was React Bootstrap. And so I haven't personally used it with Gatsby, but by virtue of our great plugin ecosystem and being in the React ecosystem, I'm fairly confident that that would work just fine. I'm not sure about React Bootstrap in particular, but I know there are some great Bootstrap libraries that work just dandy with Gatsby.
Okay, going back to Slido, our next question is, does Gatsby Preview work just as well with file system, source, and markdown, or JSON transform plugins?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how this would work currently is it would work similarly to like your local development flow. So for instance, a scenario that I could imagine being really helpful is you might have like a staging branch or like a develop branch, and then you can push changes to that branch and as a pull request. So for instance, if you're editing Markdown, if you want to add a new blog post, you could then continue using GitHub as your source of truth. And so you could add a new blog post, and then when that is pushed to the branch that you're previewing, that would then hot reload just as if you were running it locally. But the key difference is that you can then share that URL with your entire team, anyone on the project. And so everyone can see in context, what the next deploy, what the stage deploy of your Gatsby application will look like. And then you also asked about JSON transform, same idea. So if it works locally, it'll work in Gatsby Cloud.
Great. All right, our next question is, how would Gatsby Cloud work with a pull request development process, for example, GitHub workflow?
I think I might have answered this earlier, but the idea here is that when you add your GitHub repo, we automatically subscribe to webhooks, and so on commit, on pull request, we'll listen to those webhooks and then do the appropriate thing. So for instance, on like a master push, that will trigger a Gatsby build, which will then deploy to production. If your preview branch is called develop, on a preview branch push, for instance, you are adding a new component, you're trying out a new hero image, you're just tweaking some content here and there, that would then be hot reloadable when that commit is pushed to that branch. And so we'll listen to GitHub webhooks and then respond appropriately, either build or preview.
Okay, great. I'm going to grab another question from GoToWebinar. And this question is preview compatible with WordPress 5.0 and the Gutenberg editor? And is it currently ready for Gatsby themes?
Awesome question. So not quite yet, but soon. So we have a team of excellent WordPress and Gatsby engineers who are on the open source team who are maintaining WP GraphQL and then working on Gatsby source WordPress. And their highest priority task is making Gatsby source WordPress, so WordPress, work with Gatsby Cloud and Gatsby Preview. So the idea is that same workflow that I showed in like Contentful and Cosmic would work the same in WordPress. And so I think that's really, really exciting because, WordPress, for all its faults and, also all its greatness, is like a third of the web. And so being able to capture that, letting your content editors use the tools that they love, and also getting some really nice benefits of using Gatsby and getting a really performant website would be really great with WordPress.
Great. And then there was the question about themes. Go ahead.
Good question. So I'm not as intimately familiar with Gutenberg and like the WordPress themes. Generally, what would probably happen is that there would be some official Gatsby source WordPress themes, and then those would kind of mimic or be similar to the ones that you can that you might have available in WordPress proper. And the idea then being that you can use the power of like the Gatsby ecosystem and React, including React, GraphQL, etc., rather than using the PHP themes in WordPress. And so it would be Gatsby themes, not WordPress themes.
Okay. All right. So hopping back to Slido, how do Gatsby's builds compare to Netlify, and could it replace Netlify?
Great question. So I like to think of Gatsby in like two senses. So I think of inputs, which is like Gatsby's data layer, so pull data from anywhere. And with Gatsby Cloud, in particular Gatsby builds, I think of then outputs. So given inputs, given these changes to the world, so a change to WordPress, a change to Contentful, Gatsby builds will then build out the application quicker than other continuous deployment providers. And then it can then deploy to wherever you'd like your content to live. So I think the really cool thing here is that you can keep using Netlify. Like Netlify is an excellent CDN and host. And so we can deploy to Netlify using Gatsby builds more quickly and without timing out. So that's how it generally compares to Netlify. It's very much the same idea of, you can keep using the tools that you know and love, but with Gatsby, you can treat data as inputs and you can treat the result of a build as outputs and deploy it wherever you'd like.
Great. Our next question is, will builds also include testing around accessibility and provide feedback on that?
Love that question. Very near and dear to my heart and lots of people at Gatsby as well. So when I mentioned reports, I think that an accessibility report is certainly one that's, prioritized a little more highly relative to others. So I think automatic linting of accessibility errors, accessibility warnings, and then providing actionable tips on making your Gatsby application more accessible is certainly something that is definitely on our roadmap and that we definitely want to deliver.
Great. All right, our next question is, what's the pricing structure for Gatsby Cloud?
Great question. So I'd recommend that you go to gatsbyjs.com/pricing, and that has our tiers. And so what's really cool is we recently launched and kind of like announced Gatsby Cloud November 14th, I believe. And what's really excellent about the launch, at least for me, you know, as a developer, and I think for everyone here, is that there's a free tier. So you can try it, you know, no strings attached. It's not a trial. You can try it as long as you'd like. And then we have a pro plan, business plan, if I recall correctly, and then enterprise plans. And so go ahead and check them out. Our model is based on usage. So the more value you're getting out of Gatsby Cloud, you'll kind of gravitate into higher paying tiers. But you know, no strings attached. Go check out the free tier and really let us know what you think.
Great. All right. And, you know, since we're close to the 10-minute mark, we do have a few more questions. If you have other questions, please do keep sending them in. Again, they're at Slido, which is slido.com, and then you put in the code 5683. So our next question is, can Gatsby Cloud build and preview work with internal data sources, and what's necessary to make them work?
Awesome question, Sergey. So yes. So how that would work is also I'm presuming by internal data sources you mean like an internal REST API or an internal GraphQL API, some basically internal CMS even, some basically internal mechanism to get content. And so what that would entail is a custom source plugin, and we actually have a great guide, not only on our open source, you know, gatsbyjs.org, but also gatsbyjs.com, on how you can write a Gatsby Cloud aware source plugin. And so the idea is that the source content would need to be aware of like a diff. So given this state, how do I compute the next state, which is how Contentful works, how WordPress will work, how Drupal will work, etc. So some work there to get it up and running and, you know, writing the source plugin, but totally worth it to get the GraphQL API to be able to query all of your data, you know, your entire database, your entire CMS, etc. At build time rather than at run time. And so you can save a lot of money. You can really have a great experience by writing a source plugin, tapping into your internal data sources.
All right, our next question is, does it provide build files if we want to upload an unsupported server host?
Great question. So I think the question here, Lamont, would be like, you know, if you have like an internal static content solution. And so we don't currently do this, but we've heard this request a couple times, and you know, we'll definitely prioritize it appropriately. But I think what you'd be asking for here is some type of like webhook that could then trigger something internal with like a link to the bucket, you know, a link to your content that you can then basically deploy to wherever. And so I think that's a great request, and we'll kind of prioritize it appropriately.
Okay, great. Our next question is, the pricing tiers mention up to X real-time edits per day. What defines a real-time edit?
Great question. So the pricing page actually has some FAQs, some frequently asked questions, and so I would encourage you to go to that pricing page that Linda linked earlier in the chat, and go ahead and check it out. But a real-time edit is when either a build is triggered, so you've updated code or content, or a preview update is viewed. So the idea here is that if your content, your CMS changes, and you have the preview window open, that's one real-time edit. And then conversely, if you trigger a build based on like a content or a source change, one build is one real-time edit. So in that scenario, that would be two real-time edits. And so what this tends to do is it enables you to be build as frequently as you're getting value and as frequently as you're using the Gatsby Cloud platform.
Alrighty. Our next question from Jesse is, what about tests? Won't tests increase this build time dramatically?
Maybe would love to hear that question maybe on like Twitter or something, because I don't know exactly what you mean, but test, at least with the current approach to Gatsby Cloud, wouldn't be run unless you run them as part of the install step. So we just run your package JSON scripts And so if you happen to have like a post install script which ran your tests, that would be included, in the build time. But I think, like I said earlier, longer term, we will want some type of CI platform where we could, for instance, run your unit test or your end-to-end tests. But we wouldn't want that to negatively impact your build time. We'd want to get that build out, on like a pull request, and then like asynchronously at the same time, also run your unit test, your end-to-end tests, etc., which will be what reports will be.
Interesting. Okay, and Bob asks, when a pull request is opened on GitHub, can Gatsby Clouds/builds generate a preview for that PR and show the details of that build on the PR?
Excellent question. So I think you're thinking of like a GitHub status check, and we have the underpinnings of that. We haven't fully rolled that out yet, but definitely something that we want to do. And so I think what you're asking for here is kind of like a deploy preview at PR time in GitHub. And I think that's a completely reasonable feature request that we'll definitely want to support.
Great. Okay. So our next question is, when you say send us your large sites, what's the best way to do that?
Good question. Really good question. So I am just navigating to the open source repo. So I just shared an issue in the chat. And so this is a way that you can share your particularly large repos. And then you can see the performance engineer on the open source team who would be able to take a look. So we've seen some like 200K page sites, some 160K page sites. So if your site is even 25K, 50K, 50,000 or larger, please let us know. Please chime in. If we need to, share any secrets or that kind of thing, we can work through that as well. But yeah, we would love to check out really large sites to help drive improvements for everyone.
Great. All right, we do have a new question on GoToWebinar interface, which is preview compatible with Gatsby JS theme edits?
Is preview compatible with Gatsby JS theme edits? So I'm not sure what that means exactly. My guess is that if you have a Gatsby theme, like if you make a change to that theme with then preview update, and you would need to bump the version of the theme that your application is depending upon. So it would work just as if, in like your local environment. So if you have Gatsby theme, my company, and you make a new version that changes some things, you would need to bump the version of your application that consumes that theme to use that newer version, and then Gatsby preview would then automatically be updated. Right. I'm not sure I captured that question exactly, so if there's more clarification, let me know.
Yeah. Okay, I think his question has been answered. So we'll hop back over to Slido. Our question is, what is the expected timeline for WordPress support in Gatsby Preview? That's
a great question. Sooner rather than later is, of course, the answer that we would like to give. We have some stuff that's working locally. We just need to flesh out all the edge cases. Certainly something that could be beta tested maybe in January or February. Please let us know. If you're someone who'd really like to test out this WordPress integration, because we think it's a really exciting one.
Awesome. All right. And Jesse's got a couple of interesting questions. This first one is one of the Gatsby build goals to get as close to real-time data as possible, thinking in the context of e-commerce applications, for example?
Yeah, Jesse, you're amazing. You're skating to where the puck is with what Gatsby builds is purporting to do. So when I mentioned that we want Gatsby builds to be like a commodity, what I mean by that is that we want to unblock use cases of Gatsby and quote unquote static site generators for use cases that weren't previously thought possible. So your example of real-time data is a perfect one. So in the future with incremental builds and even with the work we're doing now in builds, we would like to unblock a future where Gatsby could be used for a news site. Gatsby could be used for an e-commerce application where prices are changing every minute, every second. And so incremental builds certainly helps unlock some of those possibilities which previously weren't possible with static site generators.
Cool. And the next one is, are there data modeling strategies that will confound incremental builds? How will Gatsby build know what has changed, and how will those changes ripple out?
Another really good question. So How this will work is because Gatsby open source handles the data layer. So if you have a source plugin that is correctly augmenting nodes, correctly creating nodes, deleting nodes, touching nodes on change, that data augmentation step is how incremental builds will work. So the idea here is that, if Gatsby source WordPress, for instance, if a new blog post is added, that will then create a new node on webhook. And then by us owning the data layer, we can then detect which pages will need to be rebuilt based on that changing data. And so there will certainly, be edge cases here, like here and there, but that's why we'd like to start incremental builds and like a beta, like we're doing with builds, flush them out, and get to a point where like I said, builds are a commodity. There aren't edge cases that really will confound incremental builds. So also the other key thing here is that if there are these edge cases, we can flush them out. And then we don't ever want to get in an inconsistent state. So we'll err on the side of building more than we need to avoid, like, for instance, like an inconsistent state.
Great. All right, and then we've got a question from Jake, which I'm surprised didn't come up earlier, but are we all invited to your wedding? If so, will there be an open bar?
I wonder if this is Jake, one of my buddies from Omaha. We are not all invited. You can try the RSVP form. It is not non-functional, but I wish everyone could be invited, and it'll be a good time.
Maybe we can live stream that too.
Yeah.
All right, and Matt says, thanks, Caitlin and Dustin. Well, thank you, Matt, for participating.
Yeah, for sure.
That's great. I mean, if anyone wants to swoop in with a last minute question, we do have 2 minutes, but I can only leave so much dead air. So to wrap this up, thank you so much, Dustin, for giving this presentation. If anyone really wants to hear this again, we will be sending you a recording, and then our CEO and co-founder, Kyle Matthews, will be giving basically the same presentation, but probably different questions this afternoon if anyone's interested. All right, so I think we are good. Thank you all so much for participating and joining us, and thank you again, Dustin, for presenting.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate everyone showing up, and hopefully you learned something. Thank you.
Great. See ya.